First of which, I guess, is why the hell do you want this job? I mean, I'm sure you hear it a lot, but, I mean, a couple of specifics.
Well, originally I was not planning on running. I was hoping somebody would emerge that had the real specific tool set that I thought is going to be necessary for the next governor to do the real tough, heavy lifting that will be necessary. And again, it's not a knock on the other candidates. They come with different skill sets. Some are great in what they're doing today, but that doesn't necessarily translate at all to being a person that understands the process, has run a large government organization, has been effective at doing those things, and knows exactly what to do themselves and how to do it. That's why I decided to run, only because for the first time, I'm actually afraid that my kids are going to leave this state if somebody doesn't fix the problem. If we don't fix Lansing, jobs will continue to hemorrhage, people will continue to leave, and they'll take with my future grandkids with them. And I'm just not willing to accept that outcome. I want my kids to stay here. I want your kids to stay here and have the opportunity here. If they have to leave, that's a failure of leadership. If they want to leave, fine, that's their choice. But if they don't have a choice to say, I've got a good job here and a good future here, that's something that's fixable. And I intend to do whatever it takes to fix it, even if I never get reelected to anything. All I care about is keeping my kids and your kids here.
You mentioned Lansing. There's 15 days on the calendar. What do you do?
Well, that's kind of like driving into a brick wall without a seatbelt on, and as you hit the wall, say, what do you do? What you do is you slow down, you put your seatbelt on, you don't put yourself into that position in the first place. The legislature met only one day out of 6 weeks in the summer and suddenly couldn't adopt a budget because they didn't have enough time to get it done. I mean, it's crisis in action, not forward planning. And so that's why my proposal to adopt the budget by May 15th, so that schools, cities, townships, villages, and stakeholders know what they're going to get from the state before they adopt their budget, A, and B. Every day after May 15th it's not adopted, the governor and the legislators lose a day's pay. So, in the real world, if you don't do your job, you don't get paid. And one of the most important jobs of the legislature is to pass a budget and the governor to sign it, and if they're not doing it, don't pay them.
A lot has been talked about this budget. The school districts having to take it, and Kalamazoo and Portage are going to have to take it pretty hard. As a governor, what do you say to these school districts if you're elected? Because you said you're going to make some fundamental changes to the system, moving that to May 15th. But if today, if I put you as the governor of the state, what should Governor Granholm be telling these school districts?
Well, again, you're kind of dropping me, parachuting me into a house on fire and saying, where do you start putting out the fire that they lit? Which is basically what happened. This was a self-induced wound, and it's kind of tough to parachute in at this point and say I wouldn't have shot myself. That's kind of where I am on what's going on today. But I think if I'm elected on January of 2011 when I become governor, we're going to move to that budget process to adopt it by May 15th, A. B, I'm going to sit down with the superintendents and say, how can I help you control your costs so that we can focus the resources on the teacher and the student at that moment of time when learning occurs. Those are the kinds of things that I know very well. I chaired education for 3 years in the Senate. I was Legislator of the Year by the Michigan School Board Association. I know those issues deeply, and I know the solutions that will be necessary to focus the resources on the missions that are important. And certainly education of our kids is one of those important missions.
How important is the Michigan Promise Scholarships?
Well, I think on two levels. It's important. A, it's government saying this is a Michigan Promise Scholarship.
Hard to break a promise.
And it sends a very clear message that we promised you, we care deeply about your future and your education, but until we run out of money for our other stuff that we want to do, then it's no longer a promise. I don't accept that promise, so I believe we need to honor the Michigan Promise Scholarship, and that's where you get into the structural changes to do determination of priorities, and those priorities that are left, how do you do them better? And there's a lot of ways to do that. As I mentioned, feeding the inmates in my jail. I run one of the largest jails in America, 1,200 employees, almost 2,000 prisoners. We were able to save $1.6 million every year just by changing the process of how Who provides the food? If the state did the same thing, it's approximately $40 million every year just by changing who does the food. And so as you begin to do that, that's real money. Even in government, $40 million a year is a nice chunk of change. So when you reapply those savings that you can find all over the government in all areas of the budget to those important priorities, you can still fund them while you're reducing your aggregate budget. That's what people are doing every day at their kitchen table. They're saying what's important, what's a need, what's a want. The wants have to be postponed. The needs become critical. If you need to have a new roof, you get 3 or 4 bids, and then when you get the lowest bid, you try to talk them down a little more. I mean, government is going to have to use common sense and treat your dollar like it's our dollar individually, because government typically doesn't care as much about your tax dollars as you do, and we have to adopt that as the new mantra. We care about it as much as you do because you have less money today than you did years ago, and we understand that, and we appreciate it, and we're going to be a good steward of it.
Earlier this year, they were talking about closing down rest areas. They were talking about closing portions of parks. And it doesn't sound like much, but there's some savings. I heard you mention before about that, and you have a plan for that.
Absolutely. I mean, those are one of the things, instead of just closing it, and now they become unsightly. There's overgrown weeds, and there's chains across the road, and
no place to go to the bathroom.
No place to go to the bathroom, and visitors come to our state and say, what the heck's going on here? So appearance-wise, we're selling pure Michigan across the country, but don't look for a restroom. It doesn't really fly together, and so look at ways of doing things differently. Why not look to a private vendor and say, okay, let's bid on this particular rest area. You get it for X amount of years. You pay revenue to the state. You operate your facility or that part of the rest area. You maintain it, keep it looking well. People have a place to not only stop and go to the restroom, maybe get a cup of coffee or something to eat. It's a win-win. We're going to have to do things differently, and public-private partnerships are one of those things that we can do. And it's very doable. It's just get out of the box. They've been hopelessly trapped in this box.
Out of the box thinking, what do you do? Take that and put it into Detroit. I mean, there's a whole heck of a lot of, being on the west side of the state, we hear a lot about Detroit in a negative fashion. Folks across the country figure all Michigan is Detroit. What do you do to try to change things there?
Well, Detroit is very much what Lansing is today, but further accelerated. So, the one thing I would do is sit down with not only the mayor of Detroit, but all mayors across the state and say, how can we work better to help you maximize the reducing resources that we all collectively have? How can we regionalize? How can we share? How can we do things better together? How can we change structurally the things we have to change to make it better for you to operate your city? I mean, a lot of the systemic issues that the mayor struggles with in Detroit, they don't have the help from the state to change, and they need that help on maybe the way their council's elected, maybe on the ways that they make determinations on how strong a decision process is, on how they create opportunities to share those services. There's some impediments to sharing services, how we can break some of those down to be more cost effective. There's a host of things that can and need to be done. And Detroit is just kind of in the same boat the rest of the state is, but they're more accelerated. They're further down the path. But unless we change the way we're going, and I'm absolutely confident we can, I'm absolutely optimistic that we will, but unless we do, the rest of the state will begin to mirror some of the decline that Detroit has had because the current model is unsustainable.
Thanks. Appreciate it.